You're listening to Informed Dissent. If you're a longtime listener, welcome back. If you're new, welcome, and here's the lay of the land. I'm Jamie Reed, a lesbian and a whistleblower who worked inside a pediatric gender center. My co-hosts are Lauren Leggieri, also a lesbian and a longtime LGBT advocate. Our other co-host is Cori Cohn, a gay man who underwent gender transition early in his life. All three of us come from the left, and none of us fit the story you've been told about who questions gender medicine. And that's not an accident. Every week, we will cover the headlines you need to know across medicine, law, sports, schools, and prisons. And then we dig in. The three of us, and most weeks, a guest worth hearing from. We built this show because we believe that the most important conversations about gender politics are the ones happening between people with real stakes and real disagreements. Free inquiry, honest argument, and dissent that's worth something because it's actually informed. Welcome.
Hello and welcome to Informed Dissent. This is your news for May 23rd, 2026. First, a word about today's episode. Today is a double interview episode. First, we will go to Maine, where the news on their ballot initiative is coming at us fast. Jamie has the full story in the intro. Then we go to California. So it's California and Maine back to back. Stay with us. And to your news. 8 Democrats voted yes on the Protect Kids Act. The House passed the Protect Kids Act this week, 217 to 198, requiring parental consent before schools change a child's pronouns, name, or access to sex-based spaces. 8 Democrats crossed over and voted yes. Their names are in the show notes. They deserve to hear from their constituents. The bill now goes to the Senate, where good bills all go to be ignored. A federal judge thinks a women's shelter is the right place for an HIV-positive male killer. Of course. A San Francisco federal judge is considering compassionate release for Leon Butler, a trans-identified male who fatally shot his client in 2023 and has served half of a 5-year manslaughter sentence. Proposed placement, a women's shelter for survivors of sexual or exploitation. The judge called the idea, quote, better. The women already living there were not consulted. They never are. Bold move, Your Honor. And in Texas, Children pays $10 million and will fund the nation's first detransition clinic. Texas Children's Hospital has settled with the Texas AG and DOJ. The terms are $1 million, a permanent end to gender interventions on minors, 5 physicians to be terminated, and the creation of the nation's first dedicated detransition clinic. Free care for patients who want to reverse course. The medical establishment spent years insisting detransitioners were anomalies and building exactly zero infrastructures to help them. A state attorney general just made the country's largest pediatric hospital do what medicine refused to do on its own. And then you go to Colorado, where Colorado Supreme Court orders a hospital to resume gender treatments. The same week, Texas compelled a hospital to stop. Colorado's Supreme Court ordered Children's Hospital Colorado to resume gender interventions for minors, calling federal funding threats speculative. What the court did not rule on is whether any of this is actually safe or effective. The HHS evidence review finding the benefit evidence very uncertain still does stand. And in Kansas, a Kansas judge tried to dismiss Jamie Reed. Bless his heart. A Douglas County judge temporarily blocked Kansas Senate Bill 63 and gave little weight to several state witnesses, including Jamie Reed, who has testified in 17 states and spoke on the steps of the Supreme Court. Judge Folsom may want to Google her when he gets a minute. This is a preliminary proceeding. The state will have a full opportunity to appeal, and Attorney General Kobach is already appealing. If the Kansas Constitution provides no broader protection than federal constitution, scrutiny does apply. This case is far from over, and neither, as the judge will likely come to understand, is Jamie. Coming soon, the Supreme Court rules on women's sports. A decision in West Virginia v. BPJ and Little v. Hecox is expected before the court's term ends in late June. We will cover it the moment it comes down. And today we will be diving into Maine's ballot initiative to save girls' sports and spaces, and then we will be speaking to the only Democrat running for Nancy Pelosi's seat that actually knows what a woman is, Marie Harabiel. That's it for your news. On to the show.
There is a mechanism in American democracy that does not get enough credit. It's slow, unglamorous, and it requires convincing strangers to trust you in grocery store parking lots. It is the Citizens Ballot Initiative. On January 3rd, on this show, we spoke with advocates in Washington state who are using it. And on April 11th, we spoke to two more advocates in the state of Colorado, where voters will decide this November on three separate initiatives. But today we're going to go east. We're going to Maine. Maine is not a red state, and it is not a red state attempting to become a red state. We see you, Montana. Maine has a Democratic governor, a Democratic legislature, and a Democratic trifecta that has defeated 8 bills that would have protected sex-based sports and spaces in schools. Maine made itself a transgender sanctuary state in 2024. And you may remember, it was Maine's governor who stood in the White House, looked Donald Trump in the face, and she said, "I'll see you in court." The Department of Justice sued the state of Maine in April of last year, and that lawsuit is still ongoing. And yet, in February of this year, Mainers submitted nearly 80,000 signatures to their Secretary of State, more than the nearly 68,000 required to put a question on the November ballot. A question about whether school sports and facilities should be designated by sex. Gathered in a state where doing so made you a target. That campaign was led in part by Leyland Streiff, a retired marketing executive, a husband, a father of 3, and the founder of Maine Girl Dads, a coalition of more than 8,000 fathers from across the political spectrum. His arguments are ones that we often make on this show, that the rights at stake here are sex-based rights, not anti-anyone, but sex-based. And within that framing, it has been winning him converts in one of the most progressive states in the country. Now, this is where the story is going to get a little bit complicated and harder to tell. Because first, the signatures were certified. In March, Secretary of State Shelton Bellows, the same Democrat who made Maine a transgender sanctuary state, looked at the numbers and said, "Yep, valid. 71,000 signatures, more than the 67,682 required." But that's when the legal machinery started. A coalition that was led by Equality Maine, and yes, you can't make this up, by the Maine Women's Lobby, filed a challenge. A judge ordered hearings, and at those hearings, witnesses who showed up, people from Planned Parenthood and the Maine People's Alliance, had been watching, documenting, and they knew exactly where to look. What they found was not fraud. The hearing officer said so explicitly. What they found could be characterized as some sloppiness. Paid out-of-state circulators who left petition forms unattended, and voters who signed without a witness present. These are real violations of Maine law if they are proven to be accurate. And that was enough. Right now, more than 12,500 signatures are being recommended for invalidation. The campaign that certified at more than 3,000 signatures above the threshold now sits at 532 below it. Protect Girls Sports in Maine released a statement to us today, Friday, May 22nd, stating, quote, Protect Girls Sports in Maine is reviewing the recommended decision closely. We are continuing our defense of the Protect Girls Sports ballot measure and will be filing our objections to the recommended decisions before the deadline. End quote. As of Thursday, the Chief Deputy Secretary of State has recommended this referendum not appear on the November ballot. Secretary of State Bellows makes her final determination this coming Tuesday, basically as this episode is going to drop. So here's what I want you to take away. This is not a red state campaign. It was built in a state where circulating those petitions made you a target from day one. And the opposition knew that, and they organized against it before a single signature was gathered. They watched every table, and they documented every absence. But 76,000 people signed their names anyway. Whether or not this makes it on the ballot, this did happen. If it does, if Bellows holds that the March certification, or if the objections prevail, and if Mainers vote in November, it will not be easy to dismiss this as a red state culture war. It will be something else entirely. A note, when we sat down with Leyland to record this conversation, the court challenge was still unfolding. And as of today, when we release this episode, Saturday, May 23rd, we do not know where it is going to land. We still do not have a final decision. What you are about to hear was recorded in that uncertainty, which honestly makes it more important to listen to, not less. So, without further ado, Leyland Streiff, welcome to Informed Dissent. Leyland, thank you so much for joining us on Informed Dissent.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. So excited to be here.
So we're going to jump right in. So Riley Gaines stands in a room and asks, where are the dads? And you heard this and you started Maine Girl Dads. Walk me through what happened between hearing that question and you knocking on your first door with a clipboard.
Yeah, I think quite a few things happened, and Riley's been a huge inspiration, and she's been part of our campaign as well, and was up here back in last November as well. Um, Clarification, there are a couple of people that came together to found Maine Girl Dads, and that's something, I've been a part of since the founding days, and I've taken over as the leader of it since. The reason that Maine Girl Dads came together in the first place was the fact that there were males invading female spaces, bathrooms and locker rooms in schools, and there were males that were winning state championships. Just last year, right before we launched Maine Girl Dads, there was a male that won the state pole vault championship by jumping over 6 inches higher than the female that got second place. And not only did that male get first place, that gave the team enough points to win the entire state title for their team. So the all-female team was given second place in the state. So the ripple effect of females that started to get affected by this was already becoming quite large. So what we did was we got together and we actually launched a petition. We launched a petition to the Maine Principals Association, the governing body of education in Maine, saying, guys, this is like nuts. Like, we have to change the policy so that the policy aligns with federal Title IX, and private spaces and sports opportunities, competitive sports opportunities, are once again designated by sex. 8,000 dads came together and signed that petition and urged change to the MPA, and they didn't do anything. So what we ended up doing was we pulled together a bit of a rally that we had at the State House in Augusta. Chloe Cole came and spoke for us, and we had a bunch of other, legislators and advocates and other people that just got up in the community and talked about this as an issue and really advocated for change. So, we sort of went forward from there. That I can talk more about how we then turned that into a referendum, but that's really where we started, was the fact that we were seeing things happen in our schools that shouldn't be happening. We realized that it wasn't up to just these girls to be standing up and talking about it. And like, what a dad's supposed to do? Like, we're supposed to be able to stand up for our kids and do the hard things, not just when it's easy, but probably especially when it's hard. So we got up and we did that and followed, the path we were supposed to, which is like, let's ask the MPA to do something, and met with complete silence and inaction.
So, one of your mottos I saw was paternal, not political.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a genuine description for you of who shows up? Is that strategic? Talk to me about that use of those like those words.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of all of that. I have a long history in marketing, so which I'm finding more and more really matters when it comes to sort of political means, and the way that we look at our organization, the people that have come together, is specifically that. Our feelings on this are purely paternal, not remotely political, and completely based in common sense. Politics, from a Maine Girl Dad standpoint, has nothing to do with who we've pulled together and the change that we're asking for. We have a pretty even split out of the people that I've talked to and I've met with that are part of this group, between Republicans and Democrats. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a party line issue. And I think as I talk to people and meet with people that are not only part of our group, but just sort of advocates of the overall cause, they really fall across the entire political spectrum. It's not a party line thing. And I think what's unfortunate is that if you look at state lawmakers in Augusta, it is a party line thing. Everyone is, on the Democrat side is just towing the same line, and on the Republican side is towing the same line. And that's not how the general populace looks at things. So we, Maine Girl Dads, you will see we have not endorsed any political candidates. We're not talking to any political candidates. They're not showing up at our events. We're not showing up at their events. Like, this has nothing to do with that. All this has to do with is common sense, and parents, especially, not just dads, standing up for their kids and saying, sex is real, sex matters, and sex is a protected class, and we need to be able to stand up for our kids.
I want to talk a little bit about your marketing background. Not a background I have. You worked with major brands, big
Mm.
agencies. When you think about how this has been messaged on both sides, so feel free to critique whatever we would call our side too. Um, what are advocates missing in the branding and the marketing of sports or sex-based protections
Mhm.
or even the medical side?
Yeah, and it's yeah, great question. I think one fine point I'd say on it is that in general, sort of marketing and advertising is not only raising awareness of an issue, but from a brand standpoint, you're probably trying to influence public opinion, right? And I would say that what the best brands have always done is not invent truth, but rely on truths that already exist. And so, there's an old saying that's famous in the industry of, good advertising will only make a bad product fail faster. And I think that very much applies to having conversations with people about an issue like this, that you need to rely on facts. And I think that is the core of how I have gone about this and how I've started to, organize the tip of the spear when it comes to our messaging. Fewer messages, and having all of those messages be indisputable facts that everybody can agree with. So there's a few things with that to maybe ramble for a little bit. There are a lot of different places that people go when you start having this conversation with them. And I think a lot of them are deemed subjective in a lot of ways. So we can even talk about the fact that, when it comes to sports, males are stronger and perform better than females, for example. That's true. That is true. I think that's actually objectively true. But that gets you into an argument that you actually don't need to have. There's people that are going to, not believe you, or you have to go through 20 different steps of an argument to help them understand, like, that, doesn't negate the fact that there's, females of different sizes and body types and all of that sort of stuff. That actually doesn't matter. While that is a true argument, and that might be true to someone's own personal experience, that's actually not the core of the issue. If we get to the core of the issue, we get to the core of the facts, it's the fact that there are federal rights, civil rights that have existed for over 50 years. Those rights are on the books today, and they continue to be violated every single day. And I think if we rely on that, people agree. I don't want to discriminate against people, and I don't want to violate people's civil rights. And that is what I think where we've tried to hone our language is saying, well, how do we just get to things that everybody agrees on? Because when you really strip this down, I think we actually agree a lot more than we disagree. And I think the second is attacking head on things that are, these sort of, ad hominem attacks at people that are on, quote unquote, our side about this. So we want to talk about the things that we constantly hear that we're creating discrimination. No, we're not. We're ending sex-based discrimination. So let's head that off at the pass and talk about the fact that what we're doing is ending regressive, sexist, illegal sex-based discrimination that is happening in schools right now. Once you start talking about that, you remove all of the ammunition that the other side even has about this. And so that's strategic in nature, but it's also true. Like we're not, so the other is that we're also not discriminating against anybody. So there's belief that we constantly hear that this is about forcing stereotypes on everybody and having everybody adhere to gender norms. No, actually, I think we say the opposite of that, that it had that off at the pass. We have the progressive opinion that there is no right or wrong way to be male or female. Sex is the one innate, immutable, common trait that every human being has. So what we're doing is actually not organizing and segregating children based off of how they look. We stopped doing that based when the Civil Rights Act was passed, and instead based off of who we are at our most common, innate, and immutable levels as human beings, which is our sex. So, these things everybody agrees with, everybody finds them true. And so I think that changes the conversation. It takes away critiques before they actually happen. And I actually think it creates a much bigger tent that people can find themselves in on both sides of the aisle here, because I get it. I think people that are initially against us are against us from the standpoint of compassion. I don't want to discriminate against anyone. I want to be able to include everybody. Agree. So if we can talk to them about the fact, number one, there's a bit of a cognitive dissonance right now in how you're going about that. Sex and gender aren't the same thing, and by conflating them, you've actually created an issue of discrimination. And then two, once you've sort of broken them open in that way to understand something actually is wrong and needs to be fixed, that the solution that's actually the most inclusive and progressive solution and the only legal solution is the one that is based off of sex. So I do think marketing has helped.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it doesn't. I always say like our worldview here is a lot more complicated to explain this phenomenon when the other side has trans women are women and protect trans
Right.
kids, and we have to explain how gametes work. And like, yeah, it's just not as easy. You don't want to have an easy like slogan, right? Like it's a very complex topic that they have kind of diluted down to these catchphrases that everybody just repeats and then it gets stuck, you know? But yeah.
Exactly. And what's funny with all of those catchphrases is they change and nobody holds them accountable to what the catchphrase was 3 years ago when we were all
Yes.
saying no one's changing their sex and sex aren't the same
Yes.
thing and gender is a social construct. So I just keep saying those same things. You told me gender is a social construct. Sex is a
Yeah.
different thing. Identify however you want. Great. I have no problem with that. But that isn't sex, right? It's not scientifically, definitionally, and it's not legally. So there's a reason that, all civil rights laws, including the Maine Human Rights Act, lists gender identity separately from sex. Like they are definitionally different things. So,
Yeah.
you know, inclusion doesn't require discriminating people on the basis of their sex. Actually, we can include everybody because everybody has a sex, not everybody has a gender identity.
Yeah.
He's good.
Yeah, you are good.
You're good.
Thank
So
you.
I
Well,
know,
I like talking about it. The more that we talk about it, the more like you're like, oh, that clicks. That just makes
Yeah,
sense.
no, it's good.
yeah. So you guys, and we're in the same boat. Like we're not a political organization. We're just focused on truth and medical ethics and, protecting kids. But you're in Maine, and it's not just blue. I mean, you have a blue trifecta, right? Both houses, governor, Democrat. So what is it like trying to organize a non-political like group of people who are different in partisan respects don't see this as political, but you're in an environment that is going to make this political. Like, what is it
Yeah.
like knowing that you have every lever of power in that state is towing the party line?
Yeah, and look, I mean, there's the reality as well that I've grappled with over the past 9 months that while we are a non-political organization, not apolitical, non-political, obviously the means to the end that we're trying to enact is a political process because there's no other way that we're ultimately going to change laws and policies in our state. So, we've sort of stepped in it with, as much as we need to. That being said, it's not easy because I think that there's a lot of things that end up happening here is that there is a couple things at play. Number one is yes, we are a blue state overall. There is a strange dynamic in Maine, though, where if you look at the totality of Maine, which is one of the largest states in the country, but only about 1.3 million people that live here, most people and most of the sort of landmass of the state are sort of hardworking, traditional values, red state. That being said, you get into these remote areas and very low propensity voters that the people that show up at the polls are all the people that immigrated from Massachusetts and are all liberals that live in Southeast Maine. I mean, for the most part, that's true. And so, most of the policy decisions that end up happening in the state are actually driven by a very small part of the state, which is really like Cumberland County and sort of, southern Maine around Portland where there's more of just sort of a population mass. So while yes, there is sort of this outsized amount of liberal influence, there are a lot of like-minded people that are actually on our side about this that just aren't actually part of the political process. And I think we're seeing more and more of that. I think that the other thing too is like I'm not going to shy away from the fact that it is hard not getting political about this. There are politicians talking about this stuff where give you an example, Janet Mills, who now has, she's not
Yeah.
running anymore. But while
I
she
was going
was
to
still
ask you about
running,
her. Yeah.
yeah, she was asked about our referendum a few weeks ago. And I guess it was at like some event with a bunch of business owners, and the Bangor Daily News reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you have any comment?" She had said at this event, her thoughts on the referendum were that we are one, manufacturing this crisis, and two, that we are demonizing children. And obviously, like from a human perspective, my like immediate response to that wants to be like, are you out of your effing mind? And like, make this sort of like a political rebuttal to what's going on. But it wasn't at all. I mean, my response to them actually was, quite genuine in that, I said I can't imagine that the governor of our state actually agrees with the continued violation of the civil rights of our state's most vulnerable population, our children. There's no way. There's no way that she could possibly agree with that if she actually knew what was going on. And the second is the fact that I guess she must have missed the testimony of all of the girls that showed up in Augusta 2 weeks ago and talked about their experiences of those civil rights getting violated, where there were girls and their parents that got up and talked about not only males, playing sports, males in the locker rooms and bathrooms, males masturbating in those spaces, and them feeling unsafe, unable to even bring this up for scare of, sort of retribution from other administrators or other students. So, I think what I'm finding and what I'm getting at here is that we actually have a powerful position to rise above that. They're going to continue politicizing this issue all the I'm not going to do that. And we're not going to do that because honestly, they kind of look like buffoons in all of it. And what they're doing is politicizing children. And that's crazy to me. And I do think that that ends up happening a little bit, honestly, on both sides. That's not, I wouldn't say that's just a Democrat thing. There is sort of this, talking point of we are going to use this to point a finger and yell at the other side and get people elected. I got to be totally honest. I don't really give a shit who ends up getting elected in November. Outside of this issue, like this issue to us, like we care about this and this referendum. We win this not just with Republicans. We win this not just with Democrats. We win this not just with independents. This is something that cuts across everybody. And the fact that these politicians don't understand that is also crazy. I got to say, like, if they had any brains, I think they would look at this and say, before the primary, especially this summer, how do I set myself aside from the pack, especially on the Democrat side? All of you are saying the same thing. 65% of Democrats in this state don't agree with you. How in the world do you think it's a smart strategic move to say the opposite than what the majority of the population thinks? This is like the easiest layup in history, I think, is what Riley Gaines keeps calling it.
Yeah. And so you guys, you needed 68,000 signatures, but you ended
Yeah.
up collecting almost 80,000 signatures.
Yeah.
That's a lot of signatures because it's based on population. So
Right.
what were some of the conversations you were having with these people? So like, who are these people? Because you're saying like
Yeah.
this is not a popular issue. So like,
Yeah.
why are people still voting for these people who are putting these crazy
Hmm.
laws in? I mean, are people as
Totally.
impassioned about this as we are?
I think they've become that way. And maybe to rewind 1 second too, because I did talk about, when we formed Maine Girl Dads, we petitioned the Maine Principals Association. That didn't result in any change. So what ended up happening is at the end of the summer, actually 2 days after the murder of Charlie Kirk, seven of us got together and we applied for a citizens initiative to create this ballot referendum initiative to be able to pass this through a majority vote next November. And so that was approved in October after we submitted in September, and we started collecting on election day. So that's where the sort of citizens initiative referendum started, and where we are now. We'll then get into. So yeah, the response has been huge, phenomenal. Election day alone, we collected, I think it was 56,000 signatures on the first day.
Wow.
And so what ends up happening, obviously, I don't know if you've been to Maine. If you have been to Maine, you probably went in the summer and you didn't come in December. But as you start getting into the winter months, it gets very dark and people are very spread out and it's much harder to get to people. So while we got a huge amount of people on election day, harder to get to people over the next couple of months. At that point, just because, people are not all showing up at the same place. We don't have the same population centers as other states. So it did take us a couple of months to get, across the finish line, and to make sure that we were clearing sort of the margin of success that we wanted. But that being said, it makes that 80,000 or so, I think, even more impressive. The months that we ended up collecting those in, was really incredible. What I ended up seeing was a couple of things as we were collecting signatures. Number one, obviously, there were some crazy, very vocal people. I remember on election day standing with my kids collecting signatures and have people scream in my face, F you, you effing Nazi. Which is, I guess, how much, one, we've really broadened the definition of Nazism because obviously standing up for sex-based rights now, you were a Nazi. But two, I guess that's how much that individual cared about children that they would do that in front of my kids. And some of us saw that stuff, and there were places that we needed to even remove, solicit, circulators of ours, out of Portland, for example, where people were getting really aggressive with them. So that was happening. That being said, I would say as an overall point, 70 to 80% of every single person that I've encountered on election day and after with the petition or to have this conversation is on our side about this. I would say the huge amount of those conversations I end up having are with people that are Democrats and have been registered Democrats their entire life. And I'll give a couple of examples on that. There was one guy that came up to me mad, like really mad at election day, and yelling at me like you're discriminating against trans people. And we stopped. We had a conversation. I gave him an FAQ about it. I had him read the thing, and I said, read it, and then like come talk. Like I'm standing right here. And he came back, and he was not mad anymore after he read it. And then we had a really great conversation where he walked away saying, okay, like I do have something to think about. I understand that like sex and gender aren't the same. And if we prioritize gender, we are discriminating against sex. He's like, I don't know what to do about that, but like appreciate
Yeah.
it. Shook my hand, said, what, welcome to Maine. I'd only been in Maine about a year and a half at that point. And I've had a lot of conversations like that. Like people that once you can actually just talk for a second and like we don't all just scream at each other, like we've got a lot of common ground. I think, another example is I've had contractors working in my house, several of them, lifelong Democrats. As I've been, more and more out there and we've had more traction, obviously I've been on the news and stuff like that. And I'm not super public about this, but they came in one day and was like, I think I saw you on the news yesterday. And we got into a conversation about it. And at first I wasn't sure what to think. And, he just started telling me, he's like, dude, I'm like lifelong Democrat, but like, I totally agree with you. And he started talking to me about how, he goes to the Y, and like every once in a while there's like a kid of the different sex in there, and he's like, I'm really uncomfortable. That shouldn't be happening. And talked about his wife was a D1 crew athlete, and he's like, I'm not even an athlete. He's like, I go cross country skiing, and he's like, I crush her. I crush her in crew. And he's like, I'm not an athlete at all. This woman was, D1, one of the best in the country. And he's like, I get it. Like, there's just clearly a difference from a performance standpoint, but also just like a dignity standpoint. Like, this shouldn't be a question. And we've had that conversation multiple times, and we're really close now. And like, clearly, we're on very different sides of the political spectrum. Um, and I think there's been a lot of conversations like that, and that I think is indicative of how people overall feel about this. Like, once you strip away the emotion, it's pretty common sense. And like I think that even going back to the question of like how both sides are treating this, and the sort of marketing spin on things, I do think that that's one of the things that's missing from both sides, including on the right, that is championed this issue a little bit more, is that like we can have a disagreement in an agreeable way, to use a Charlie Kirk term. And I don't know that we're always having that. I think even that are people on sort of the right side of the issue are not, maybe not demonizing, but like, like screaming at people, and like, you're wrong and you're doing all these bad things. And like, yes, like I agree with like most of what you just said, but the way in which you say stuff really matters. And like, we need more people to come into the tent. One, because like we got to stop this crazy stuff, and we need to be able to have kids that can like go to school in a safe way. But two, like we also need like societally to like bring people along. We can't just force this one way or the other on anybody. And that's a lot of what's happened here. Like if we're ever going to get past the point of hating each other on a social issue like this, like it's going to have to come with hard conversations and a little bit more compassion in how we have them.
Yeah, I actually I find that very similar to what you're saying, is that when you can get someone in a one-on-one conversation, that's when you can get them to start critically thinking, and you can, but the other problem, right, is the language. Is what you sometimes you have to
Yeah.
start a conversation explaining to people that trans women are biological men, or trans men are bi, like you have to start from
Yeah.
ground zero. So that brings me to my next question, because on the ballot initiative, so on the language in the ballot, there was some back and forth with this, and maybe the language is now not clear. The Secretary of State had some control over what the language for the
Yeah.
ballot initiative is.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the Secretary of State, the way that it works here is that we submit a proposed act as part of the referendum application. That comes back sometimes with a couple of tweaks, and then the Secretary of State writes the summary of sort of her perspective on what this means, and sort of the outcomes of what it would drive, and that gets printed on petitions. People sign those petitions. Then, after we've crossed that threshold, they have validated our petition. She then writes the question. So Shenna Bellows in Maine writes the question. She wrote that question. It was put out for public comment a month ago, actually. Public comment ended yesterday, um, where we have, the public going and saying whether or not they think the question is right or wrong. And then ideally, hopefully, she refines the question after this. So there's no sort of, introductions of lawsuits or anything like that, to then get to a revised question before Election Day. The question right now is at odds with the language of the actual bill in a couple
Mhm.
of different ways. So I actually love the title of the proposed act that goes with our referendum was written by Shenna Bellows herself. And it's like awesome. It's on the nose for what we do. And it's an act to designate school sports participation in facilities by sex. Like boom, like literally
Simple.
that's everything that the bill does. It's simple. If you never told anybody else other than that one sentence, 99% of people you talk to are like, okay, that makes sense. Like, yeah, I like that. The question doesn't say that. The question says something, I don't have it in front of me, but do you want to change civil rights laws and education laws to be able to restrict people's, use of bathrooms, and have their sports, something like their sports participation be based on their gender on their original birth
Original birth
certificate,
certificate. Yeah.
which there's like a multitude of things wrong there. Like one, like
Yeah.
the most egregious being gender, obviously.
Yeah.
Gender is not the same thing. We're talking about sex. The bill doesn't even say the word gender. It only says sex, and it defines sex. And so, like, I don't see how that doesn't change because just legally that is incorrect. The second is the fact that it says, do you want to change civil rights laws? No, we don't actually. We're enforcing
Yes.
civil rights laws that exist right now. There is a federal civil right that has existed for 52 years that the state refuses
Of course.
to implement. And that is what we want to stop. And even the Secretary of State herself wrote in our summary, in her own words, that our proposed act cannot be construed to be in conflict with the Maine Human Rights Act. So even beyond federal law, she herself acknowledged that the act that we wrote is not in conflict with the civil rights law that we have here on the books in Maine that also enshrines gender identity next to sex. So I also don't see how that doesn't change. The bathroom restriction and all of that, look, I know she's trying to use negative terms to be able to, give people a reason to say no. We'll see where she nets on that. I don't think people are stupid. I think people understand, like, yes, I do want to restrict like who goes where. So I think that that's okay. And then the fourth part of the question was around, and do you want and allow them to sue schools is the wording that was used. And look, if that stays in, it stays in. I think what's interesting about that though is anyone can sue schools now. So
Yeah,
why are
I
you
was just gonna
now
say, yeah.
including that? Like, I mean, like obviously people can sue schools for a violation of their civil rights. What are you talking about? So it's just again like trying to like get people like, oh my God, like does that now mean like we're going to be in the hole millions of dollars and we should say no to this? Um, it's just anyway. So that's sort of where it stands right now. There's a couple of other things that I think are kind of incredible with the whole thing. There has been an opposition group formed, which maybe I don't know, it gets into some of the lawsuit questions that we've got now, where there is a group that is now one trying to keep the language the way that it is now in that ballot question, and two, they have now funded and forced a lawsuit actually against the Secretary of State to try to invalidate the petition and try to get this thing off the ballot. And I think what's incredible
On what basis?
on I mean, it's common that this happens in that
Yeah.
they are saying, well, hey, there were people that didn't witness all the signatures, or
Okay.
things like one of the circulators that collected 2,000 signatures, they only put their first name on their affidavit sheet. Well, that person's like Seal, they only have one name, like, for example. So like that's like anyways,
Hmm.
things like that there's a hearing on Tuesday. We feel good about it and we're not concerned about it, but it was expected that they would try to invalidate what we're doing, and it was expected that there would be a group formed in opposition to this. I think what was more unexpected than that was the groups that have come together to be able to try and oppose us. One is Equality Maine, which is sort of the LGBT alliance here, but the other is the Maine Women's Lobby, is the primary driving force of this. So they are the ones, like if you look at any of the press, and they're the lead of the group that's opposing us is the executive director of the Maine Women's Lobby, which is I don't even know
How
what
many
planet I'm on.
times, how many times a day since you've been involved in this does your brain just literally explode?
It's like we're in a movie. It
Yeah.
honestly doesn't make sense. Even just election day, the amount of times people signing it and myself together were like, are we really two like middle-aged adults signing a piece of paper that says like sex is real? Like literally, what
Yeah.
are we doing? It is so bonkers that we're having this conversation. And yeah, I mean, I all the time. I mean, I find it crazy, but also like sad and infuriating. Like people have picked an extreme position that is regressive and sexist and discriminatory, and they're saying that it is progress, and anything against it requires personal attacks at large on people that don't agree. It is absolutely crazy, but also really sad that I think so many people have bought into that and aren't willing to like stop and think for a second. And maybe one day they will, and they'll be like, "Holy shit! Like,
Mhm.
have I really supported this, or did I really scream at all those people on the street?" For something that was like discriminating against a bunch of kids, a bunch of young females that just wanted like the bathroom to themselves.
Yeah, it's crazy times to be living in, for sure.
Yeah,
So the opposition that is formed is Equality Maine with the Maine Women's Lobby. Those are the
Mhm.
groups. Okay.
Those are the
Um,
groups that are put together. with
And
Glad
you,
Law.
oh, with GLAD too.
Glad Law is helping them out. Yep.
Okay. Eh, Humor me for a minute. You've said this is inclusive of everyone. Everyone still gets to play.
Yeah.
That's kind of the phrase that we've used. Nobody's banned. Have you had to try to make that argument to a skeptical progressive who thinks you're targeting trans kids?
Yeah, I did actually. And so there was I'll give one example of this. At our turn-in event. So when we turned in the 80,000 signatures to the Secretary of State, we held a press conference. And at the press conference, it was just me and the people that, we needed to like wheel in the boxes of signatures basically were there, but a bunch of girls showed up. Bunch of young students, high school students, kids in middle school, and college girls showed up. And I only knew one or two of them, but I didn't know the most of them. And anyway, after the event, there's some questions being asked, and one of the reporters is like pissed, super fired up, just like really angry with me, and like basically yelling questions at me. And me and the person that was up there doing the press conference with me, her name was Sophia Pride. She's a state champion swimmer in Maine. And we held the press conference together. And so he was very mad at both of us, saying, "You are targeting trans kids, you are discriminating against trans kids, and you are leaving them out." And so we had a little bit of a back and forth during it. But it was a press conference, a bunch of other people there, answered a couple of his questions, super angry. And then I was like, we needed to end it and go turn the stuff in. Well, when it was done, Sophia and I went up to him to just talk to him. And she went to go shake his hand. He wouldn't shake her hand, which is absolutely incredible. So I went up to him. He did shake my hand. And I said, "Hey, look, like, I don't agree at all with what you're saying and how you're asking it, but like, appreciate you being here and very much appreciate you engaging in the conversation." And then we got into the conversation. And what ended up happening was there's some of the girls were standing with us as we had this conversation. As he again said, "You're discriminating against these kids." Um, I said to him, "Well, hey, like, this is the way we see it. Are sex and gender the same thing?" And he like thought about it and he shrugged and he's like, "I'm not sure." And I said, "Well, the American Medical Association says they're not, and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health says that they're not. They're two different things." And so I said, "Do you believe?" And he goes, "Okay." And I said, "Well, do you believe both of those things require equal opportunity and protection under the law?" And you said, "Well, yeah, sex should." And I said, "I agree." So I said, "Well, what would you say to these girls then?" And there was one of the girls that was standing there had pulled me aside before the event. She was in eighth grade. And she had said to me, "Thank you. I'm in eighth grade. I play sports. Males walk into the locker room and they watch us change. And I feel so uncomfortable. I now change in a handicap stall for the sports every single day." I said, "So what do you say to her?" Because she just told me that half an hour ago. I didn't even know her. And she said that to me. And he goes, "Well, that shouldn't be happening. Like, that's a school district problem." And I said, "Sir, that is exactly what we agree on, like 100%. And that is the only thing that this referendum is doing is exactly what you just said. Right now, and this is what we got to do as well, and in good context for this conversation, what's happening is that the state had a policy where anyone can go anywhere based off their gender identity. So what has happened is while we're doing the referendum, different school districts have voted to change their policies. So I think it's up to like 9 or 10 districts now have changed their policies. Well, what did the state do? They've sued all of those districts now, telling them that they need to roll back those policies and allow people based off of gender identity to use whatever bathroom or locker room they want or whatever sports team they want. So agree with you, sir. It is a school district problem. But the citizens in those districts are standing up and saying it needs to change, and they're getting sued saying that they can't do that. So this is the only recourse that we have, and we're doing it in the most democratic way possible, a simple majority vote. There's a lot of people that are standing out on the streets these days holding Save Democracy signs. Like, now's your chance. Like, show up. Like, this is the most democratic thing possible. I think it's more democratic than elected representatives. You all get to show up. Everyone's vote literally matters on this.
Yeah, it
So,
really is. I mean, everyone we talk to with a ballot initiative, right now they're in, anyone running a ballot initiative is in a blue state, or a democratically controlled state, and they're also blowing the numbers out of the water. Again, just like what you said, 50-50 Republican, Democrat. it really is the only way for people to have their voices heard. And we have been told, like for different causes, but in red states, if you're a party in power, you don't like the ballot process. Wherever it
Hmm.
exists, if you're the party in power, you don't like that process because it is a way for the people to really have a voice and tell you what you're doing wrong. So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, I got to ask you the question I know you get poked a lot with. Um, you actually, congratulations, you actually got some money behind you for this initiative.
Yeah,
You got a donor.
we did.
Okay. So some people have said that that disqualifies this as a grassroots effort.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First of all, Maine Girl Dads didn't get any money for that. Our ballot committee did, Protect Girls Sports in Maine did. So we are true grassroots efforts. I'm not getting paid a dime. So, I think it's a funny thing for people to say that. I think there's a couple of things with it. One is, yeah, we got a great donor. Richard Uline, awesome. Love to see that there's somebody not only in Maine that has money that is aligned to the cause that is, the will of the people in Maine. Almost 70% of the state, based off of polling, agrees with this. So I think, the number one thing we hear is it's out of state money forcing out of state ideals onto Maine. No, actually, it's the will of Mainers. Polls show that. And we've found people that are willing to be able to give us money to be able to help get it over the finish line. The second thing with that is the focus on that, I think, really is a disservice and an invalidation to a bunch of different people that have been part of this. We had hundreds of people that either volunteered or gave money to be able to be part of this up in Maine, standing outside of like grocery stores in the middle of December in Maine, collecting signatures. So, like, they don't matter anymore now. The hundreds of people that organized to be able to help us on this or put the little money that they had forward to be able to be part of this. And I think the last thing too is that saying that, and that is the number one response that the
Yes.
executive director of the Women's Lobby of Maine keeps wanting to talk about is there's been out of state money, which is also very funny because all of the law firms that she's using are from out of state and primarily funded by George Soros. But that aside, um, it also invalidates the testimony of all of these young female students that went and talked about the violation of their rights, of losing titles and sports opportunities, of males in their bathrooms, males in their locker rooms, males masturbating in these spaces. Like, how come we can't have that conversation? The only thing we want to talk about is that someone actually had some money to make sure that those girls were heard.
Yeah, anything to not address the actual issue is, in my
Exactly.
experience, yeah, anything.
Exactly. And also that money was only to get us through the signatures. Like, that was the campaign to get there. No one's given me a dime. I mean, this is like, this is literally grassroots. This is all of us just banding together as people that care about this going forward.
A couple final questions. What does winning look like in November? And what does losing look like? So are you kind of thought through and prepared both ways and what you want to do the day after either way?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, I don't know that I've thought through it in that exact way, and I probably should. That's a at this point in my mind, I'm certain we are going to get over the finish line. We will officially be on the ballot, and we will have this. We will have the will of the people enacted, and over 50% of the population will vote the right way. That being said, sure, does winning look like the referendum technically getting approved and this becomes policy across the state? Yes. Like, I think, like, from a legal perspective and a political perspective, yes, that is success. I think though that for me, the success is probably much broader and longer lived than that. I'm hoping that this has started to open up and destigmatize some critical conversations that we parents need to be having about children. This is one of them. I think this is, one of the most important ones that we're dealing with right now. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot of conversations that have become like taboo to even bring up. This, a year ago, I'll give myself as an example. If you Googled my name even 6 months ago, the only thing you would see is like a bunch of accolades and ads for really big brands that I'd launched, and just stuff about my professional career. Now everything is anti-trans, anti-trans, anti-trans. Like, none of us are sort of increasing our social or professional station in life by having anything to do with this. But courage begets courage, and the more that we can all stand up and talk about a tough problem like this, other people are going to start to do that as well. And I think that to me is winning and success on the other side of this is like, yes, I want to win on this specific issue, but I'm hoping this issue can become a little bit more of a bellwether for social conversation that we can all have on both sides of saying, hey, like nothing should be off the table when it comes to us being able to have a fact-based, compassionate conversation on something. And I think this might be like one of the hardest ones to do right now. But if we can all get through this one together, there's probably a lot more stuff we should be talking about as a nation and as a state. And from a Maine Girl Dads perspective, we are very focused right now on sex-based civil rights, but I really see this as an enduring conversation that we want to have about what matters to us as dads, for our families and for our kids, not just when it comes to, sex-based civil rights in schools. I'm hoping that we can move past that part of the conversation in November.
So, speaking of being a dad and kind of your kids, you are doing this. You've said not making a dime, probably throwing in huge amounts of time, effort, passion into this.
Yeah.
What do you want your kids to understand about why you've taken this on?
Yeah, I think they're starting to understand it. I think my oldest does at least. And I think it's the one thing that I want them to understand is to stand up for what's right, especially when it's hard. That there are things that are to, our, in worldly terms, personal detriment, things that aren't going to help us get more money and get more fame, but they're what's right. So that is all that I want them to know is that when it was hard, I stood up for something that was important and I stood for something that was about objective truth and what was right. And that is what I want them to see and know, no matter how hard that is. That is something that I expect of them. It's something that I think is expected of every dad. And I don't, I don't know that we have enough parents that, do that for their families. And I think that what we do for my own family. I want to be able to say I don't only do that in my own, my own walls, but I do that out in the world too, that I'm the same dad here, that I'm going to be out on the street and, I'm going to stand up for the same things. And I'm not just going to talk to them and tell them, about what they should be doing out in the world, versus actually doing it. There's the way that I've looked at it, and I've talked actually a lot to my wife and my kids about, is I, for one, have just sort of realized on a really personal level that, especially after the death of, Charlie, I think I've thought a lot about this, that there's probably too wide of a gap between the things that I pray in the morning, the things that I say to my kids, and the things that I do out in the world. And I want all of those gaps to close. I want the things that I believe in my faith. I want the things that I'm saying to my family, and I want the things that I'm willing to do, not only in my house, but out on the street, to all be the same thing. Because someday I'm going to die. And I don't want that to be on my conscience that there was, Leyland was one person to one person, or one person to God, and one person to my family. And I hope that that's an example that changes their world a little bit and helps, set them off on a better path.
Well, now that I'm crying,
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
um, my final question, was where can listeners find you? And especially for those who are in Maine, how can they assist you? Because you still have so much more to get this, come November. And then the other thing I'm interested in is if there are other dads that listen to our podcast and want to think about similar things in their own
Yeah.
states, can they reach out to you?
Yeah, awesome. Yes. Let me start with that one first. I mean, I've thought a bit about this and I've, want to think about it more. And I would love, people's help that are in other states and are motivated. But Maine Girl Dads has been a powerful proposition here. But I've also started to see that nationally, people are becoming aware of it and saying, man, that's awesome. Like the dads are showing up. We need that in whatever, insert whatever state. This should be sort of a national, sort of, a model that can be brought into other states. And we've got a way that we've stood it up here. We've got a way that we're doing it that really works. And I'd be happy to share that with anybody in any other state that wants to start something there and create their own grassroots, organization and movement. So reach out. And the way that you can reach out, is either through, X and Facebook, which is, at Maine Girl Dads. You can go to mainegirldads.com, as well. And then our official ballot committee, website is protectgirlsportsinmaine.com as well. So if you want to sort of see what's going on specifically with the referendum, where we are in the process and how you can get involved, there's ways to sort of donate, money or time there. Go to protectgirlsportsinmaine.com. If you are a dad or even an advocate, of families and sex-based rights for our kids, yeah, definitely go to mainegirldads.com. Shoot me an email from there. I think my phone number's on there too. You can shoot me a text. And let's have a conversation. There's a lot of different ways to get involved. We also have, there's a bunch of like merch that we're starting to launch. There's like a lot of like pride, I think, up here for the few people that have gotten some of our hats and our t-shirts. So we've got a bunch of stuff that's launching. We've got a store launching in about 2 or 3 weeks as well. If people visit our website late May, you'll be able to get some shirts and hats and stuff like that as well. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely ways to get involved. And I think the one thing that I would make inside or outside Maine is sort of a plea for everyone to get involved is just have these conversations. Like the best way to get involved is like just talk to people about this stuff. I got involved in this in Maine specifically by bringing this up to people on the sidelines at a football game a year and a half ago and being able to just not knowing where they sort of sat on the spectrum, but being able to just sort of start having a conversation and meet other people and start exchanging ideas on this, whether or not somebody agrees with you. Like that is by far the most important thing for anybody to be doing. Destigmatize this whole thing, be able to break down this barrier of like, this is a thing we can't talk about. No, like it's about our kids. Like absolutely, we're going to talk about this. Like, and if you start talking about it, and I'm like, you know what, Jamie's normal and she can talk about this, like maybe I could talk about it too. Like, and I think that really helps. The more that people see others that they maybe respect or look up to talking about it, they're like, you know what, maybe I can do that too. And we could and should all be part of that solution.
Well, we would like to, in advance, invite you back. So we're going to be
Great.
looking at
Love it.
Washington State, Colorado, and Maine.
Right.
Everybody has their ballot initiatives going up around the same time. So we want to have all of the reps from your states come back. We want to hear how your ballot initiative is going right up until that election. And then hopefully we could do something where we check in live on election night and see your
That'd be
success. So
cool.
we
That would
will
be super
definitely
cool.
reach back out. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing in Maine.
Thank you guys. Jamie, Lauren, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much. This was awesome and like a dream of mine to even meet you guys and get to talk with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome to our program, Marie.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me. I'm excited to speak with you today.
The very first thing, I have a list of questions, but I just thought of another one, which I want to ask first. Is that Chinese on your background?
There is Chinese on my background, yes.
What does that say?
It says my name in Chinese, which is Hoi Hu Wai is how it's actually pronounced in Chinese, and I probably just butchered it. But it is the translation of my name.
All right. Okay. Well, you're running for office in San Francisco, which is one of the most progressive districts in the country. And the most progressive part of the most progressive people, the queer politics people, have kind of, I guess, called you homophobic or don't like your positions. So I guess we're at a point now where in order for a person to even be progressive, they have to have complete 100% alignment with the mono cause. But what's your perspective on this? How do you describe your politics? Where are you at?
I consider myself a moderate on most things. I grew up in San Francisco, so I have a very open view of the world. I grew up having uh, all kinds of friends from every different walk of life, every different, identity group. My parents, who are Republican, always had gay friends. So it was never something I really thought was a differentiator. I thought we all kind of were friends and got, and then, unfortunately, yes, Scott Wiener's gang basically came out and called me homophobic in response to me criticizing some of his legislation. And, I think it tells you a lot about him as a person and as a legislator, that he, instead of defending his legislation, he decided to devolve to name calling, and his whole team decided to devolve to name calling.
What was that specific legislation that you were calling out? Was it a specific bill that he'd had passed, or?
Yes, and there's a lot of legislation of his that I am calling out right now, but this specifically was a piece of legislation that made it harder for the police to rescue trafficked children. It's SB 357, and it's a loitering law, and the police were using the loitering law previously to uh, rescue children, to go up to children, in who were being sex trafficked, and arrest them and then get them to safety. And according to, LAPD, Riverside PD, San Diego PD, Oakland PD, San Francisco PD, etc., the incidence of human trafficking in California they estimate it's doubled since this law was passed. And at one point, the legislature recognized that this law was doing immense harm and that they should change it. And so the legislature tried to change it. Scott Wiener, with evidence that this law is harming children, opposed the change. He fought to water the new bill down. He succeeded at watering it down. It passed, but it's very watered down and so therefore not as impactful, obviously. And he was still one of the only two state senators in California to vote against the law that made an attempt to fix this other law. So I think I think it's very important to criticize bills when they end up harming people. I mean, I think it was Abigail Shire has called California has become a predator's paradise, and specifically points to this bill as allowing predators to basically flourish in California. And instead of defending that bill and telling us why it was a good idea, he just went straight to name calling.
Well, the name calling works pretty well. I remember about 18 years ago, there was something called Proposition 8, which, believe it or not, there was a point of history in California where the majority of voters did not want to approve gay marriage in California.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, Barack Obama himself was not a fan of gay marriage back when that was happening. And the campaign, I think it was called No Hate for Eight, something like that. They were very, very effective at using the accusation of homophobia to paint anybody who had beliefs in, let's call it traditional marriage. I think that was the framing that that side preferred. But yeah,
Well, I feel like this is
homophobic.
I feel like this is an even further stretch to call someone homophobic, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of what happened is that Scott Wiener passed this law. The effects were detectable through data and through interviewing police officers saying, listen, this law is actually not working the way you think it's working. And then after presented with the data that that law is actually harming children, he doubled down to keep it in place. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of a valid criticism of somebody's conduct in office. So, I mean, I'm saying it's a bigger stretch to say people who don't want gay people to get married are homophobes, to call someone who's criticizing someone who refuses to back down on a bill that has been proven to not work. But
I agree, and
yeah,
I think it was probably a legitimate criticism in the Prop 8, was it, situation, versus this, where I'm criticizing legislation. He's certainly welcome to defend it,
yeah.
um, but he didn't.
Well,
He
I'm
had
just
his little army go out and demand that people call me homophobic.
Sorry, the point I was trying to make is that the substance of the argument really doesn't matter. It's the
Yeah.
appearance. It's all the appearance.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And if they have a tactic that works, they're just going to keep using it over and over. So have you always been a Democrat? My understanding is that you like Hillary Clinton have a background
Exactly.
of in the being a Republican.
Yes, yes, exactly. I switched parties in 2022. I had previously been a Republican, and in fact, I had actually previously run for office as a Republican. I was not expecting my life to take this turn, going after public office. But in 2019, I left my job because my city seemed to be going off the rails. And I just took 1 year to like dig in and fix my hometown. I, was so earnest and so naive, to be honest with you, about what was going to be involved. And so I had given myself to San Francisco for the year. And the community college audit came out a couple months into this journey, and the audit was, this cannot continue as a going concern, which is the worst audit you can get. And I thought, I was on the board of regents at Georgetown at the time, and I was on the board of the Presidio Trust, and I was the audit chair for the Presidio Trust. And so I thought, wow, this is someplace I could really help. So I ran for office then. I did not win, but I did get 87,000 votes. And, which there were, at the time, there were 30,000 Republicans. So even if every single one of them had voted for me, I still managed to capture, almost two-thirds of my votes were coming from other ideologies. And I think it's because I was making sense, and people appreciated hearing someone calling out what's wrong with our system and talking about actually how to fix it. So it's not that I had a idea that you couldn't run as a Republican in San Francisco. I had, and I got more votes than Chesa Boudin, our DA at the time, by the way. But I I started working in city politics. I didn't leave after 1 year. I didn't go back to my job. I really dug in and tried to be a force for positive change in San Francisco. And so I was working with all kinds of people. I was volunteering on campaigns. I was doing all these different things. And everyone I was working with was a Democrat, and we all shared values. So that was the first time I really realized how many shades of blue there are in the Democratic Party, much like there are shades of red in the Republican Party. And so when I realized we all shared, that the people I was working with all shared the same values, and we all did not share the values of the more extreme end of the party, it made me feel very comfortable that I could switch parties and really be with people who I knew were, had good values and had the same kind of ideas that I had.
The kids today, who are nevertheless of voting age, will not have remembered even Arnold Schwarzenegger as governor of California. But California used to be more of a purple state. And I
Yes.
imagine that anybody who's over 40 probably recalls there was a time where you couldn't really tell if somebody was conservative or liberal just because their political party, because there were plenty of liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats back at the time. What do you think is different today? And is that something that caused you to change parties? Like the change
What
to
do
the
I
Republicans?
think is different today? Well, I do think today is just a lot more extreme, unfortunately.
Mm.
And the there's so much less civility in the public discourse across the board, which is, I don't think, serves regular people at all. I think it's easy to get attention when you're screaming from the extremes. I think a lot of people are raising money on that. I don't think it's right for our country. I don't think it's right for our public life. I think it's really, really harmful. And so I definitely see that has changed. I am hoping that there will be a pendulum swing, and I certainly intend to be a force in causing that pendulum swing. I think we've gone so extreme and so far that the vast majority of us who are in the middle are starting to just say, I'm exhausted. Please stop it. Enough is enough. And I'm hoping that there are enough people who are coming to that understanding and that realization that we can push things back towards the center, because I think that's the biggest difference in our political life right now and our political discourse. And when you see people like Zoran Mamdani in New York, and they're talking about that this is a real movement and that they think this is going to really take hold. What I say about that is we had our Mamdani moment in San Francisco with Chesa Boudin, the DA that we recalled, and we reeled that back. We said enough is enough, and we've been pushing back on that extremist ideology ever since. So I think we're at a painful moment in time, but I'm hoping that we're now starting to realize we do have to pull back from that.
So you're saying like when you started working with more Democrats, you realized we're all kind of speaking the same language. I similarly, in interacting with more conservatives now, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, how are you conservative? Because socially, like we really do agree on a lot of things. Just regular Americans do really just fall in the middle and agree on a lot of
Yes.
things. But there is one topic that no matter what you agree with the left on, if you disagree on this one thing, you're considered a right-wing extremist among those far, in and of their own right, extremists on the left. And
Right.
that is
Immigration?
the no, it is the trans issue, right? And it is particularly calling a spade. And you have said, I mean, one of your biggest issues with Scott Wiener, who is running to replace the first female Speaker of the House, mind you, has really made it his mission to allow men and women's spaces. And you have
Yes.
spoken about this very plainly.
Yes.
Do you want to give us your ideas around this topic here?
Yes. So I believe in protecting women and girls. I believe in protecting single sex spaces. I believe everyone should be treated with dignity and respect. So this idea that if you if you believe in women's spaces, you suddenly are anti someone else. It's not I'm not anti anything. I'm pro treating everyone with dignity and respect. And part of treating people with dignity and respect is recognizing that you can't self-identify into their spaces. And so it's just really pretty simple and pretty plain. I believe that the polling shows that 85% of Americans agree with this position. 65% of Democrats agree with this position. Rahm Emanuel has spoken very eloquently and plainly and simply on this topic and agrees with me on this. I don't think it's I, I'm I guess I'm surprised sometimes at how angry and mean people are about this issue. I think it should be clear that every child should be able to play sports. Every person should be treated with dignity and respect, but that doesn't give someone the right to enter other private spaces.
Yeah. And it's such a toxic issue on the left, though. I mean, and you're running as a Democrat, and I think what do you think that says anything? Would you like that this campaign to say something to other Democrats? Because, like you said, 65% of polled Democrats agree with you on this issue, and
Yes.
the issue of pediatric gender transition. It might be even more it's even more, I think, for transitions for children, which again, Scott Wiener has a terrible record on.
Yeah,
So, I
yeah.
mean,
I mean, I think there's other people who can speak a lot more eloquently and directly on that topic than I can, but I will just say that the idea of someone who isn't old enough to vote yet, isn't old enough to rent a car yet, being granted the ability to make a permanent, life-altering change to their body just is shocking to me. I mean, I remember taking my daughter to get her ears pierced when she was 13, and I was required to have so much information. They would not pierce her ears without me being able to prove I was her mother and all these other things. I think it's mind-boggling that there are really incredibly intense restrictions around something like piercing your ears, but then you can cut off body parts without any parental engagement, parental involvement. You can just and not being of age to make other decisions. You're not even the age of consent yet. How can this possibly be valid? And beyond that, just speaking as a mother who's done a lot of research on brain development, our prefrontal cortexes are not fully developed until we're 25. So the idea that we're granting so much power and authority to people who are not fully developed yet to make that kind of decision is just incredibly concerning as a mother.
Yeah. And you're on the same page as a majority of Americans, but you're one of the very few Democrats and people can argue, oh, she's actually a Republican, whatever. You're running as a Democrat in a blue city, and people are responding to the way you're talking about these topics like, yeah, I get it. I agree.
Yes. Yes. And I do, to your prior question, I do hope that this inspires other people to feel empowered, comfortable, safe to speak up, because I do think what we've seen in the last, I witnessed it through the 6.5 years that I've been involved in civic life. And I'm sure it was happening before this, but cancel culture really silences people. I think we're moving away from that, or at least I hope we are. But I watched decision after decision in San Francisco government in the early period that I was starting to pay attention, where someone spoke up first, loudly, authoritatively, in a bullying manner, frankly. And and everyone else just went along with it. And I can guarantee you there must have been people who thought this isn't a good idea, but they just weren't strong enough. They didn't have, they didn't have the confidence, and they were afraid of being canceled. So they just went along with it. They weren't willing to speak up and speak about the truth. And so I do hope that my standing up and saying, what, we have to protect children, we have to protect women and girls, is something that gives other people confidence and cover to be able to say, yeah, you know what? Like, we have to figure out a way to respect everyone and to make sure everyone feels safe. People who are changing their identity, and also women and girls.
So I'm curious, like, what, besides this issue, do you differ incredibly with the other candidates on like,
I
can
do.
imagine you do. Okay. Okay.
I really represent, what I said when I started getting involved in civic life in San Francisco. That's when I really realized that the moderates, and in San Francisco, there's 520,000 voters, 350,000 of them are Democrats. So we're talking really the vast, vast majority of voters in San Francisco, and of, politicians and people in civic life. So it's not that these were, Republicans. I'm talking my entire engagement has been with, with people who call themselves moderate, and 99% of them are Democrats. And so, in San Francisco, there is a huge divide. Instead of Republicans and Democrats, what you have are moderates and progressives is what they're calling themselves. And so before I got involved, I was wondering, wow, how is it that our some of our decisions are so Looney Tunes, they're so off the rails. Who is making these decisions? And when you sit and you dig in, when I got involved, we have 11 people on our board of supervisors. There was one moderate, and she was like doing God's work, really fighting to kind of hold back the craziness. And there was one who kind of flip-flopped a little bit, was sometimes moderate, sometimes progressive. And then there were 9 solid progressives. And they were just piling, when people started to wake up and realize that the city was really going the wrong direction, it was because we had had several years of total domination on the Board of Supervisors by the progressives, who I would argue are largely regressive, but they've co-opted that moniker. And so there are a lot of differences on a lot of things. If I can go into some of them if you'd like, but so for example, RDA, who was all about decarceration and all about, defund the police, all of that. Huge divide in San Francisco on that. The progressives very much like, let's open the jails, let everybody out. And they actually really tried to do that. I was one of the few people that stood up against that and forced them to change their plan in 2020 for just opening jails.
If we completely got rid of the jails, though, we wouldn't have to worry about men being in women's prisons.
Well, there you go. There is that. There is that. But the idea of, yes, we want to root out bad apples. We do not want the police to be harming people, abusing their power. Absolutely. But this idea that the police are evil and that we need to get rid of police altogether, that is a very progressive, in San Francisco at least, progressive value. And I stood with the moderates. We should not be defunding the police. We should, in fact, be increasing the size of our police force because, this provides boundaries for society and it keeps all of us safe. And again, if there are people who are acting outside their authority, definitely root them out. But we need someone to keep the peace. So that's definitely one of the issues where I differ from the other candidates in this race. They have all expressed that they're pro-abolishing ICE. I am not pro-abolishing ICE. I believe that I stand with the majority of Democrats in the country who think that we should actually have borders, or I'm sort of the 1990s Democrat here, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Bernie Sanders, even. I mean, every Democrat Barack Obama, every Democrat up until just recently is saying we need borders. Until we decide we are not going to have borders, we need someone to enforce those borders. So, that's a place where we've differed, where I differ with the other candidates in this race. I have very clearly said defund the police did not work. It led to just a massive increase in crime on our streets for several years there. This is defund the police 2.0, and I'm certainly not in favor of that. We need borders, we need protection. If there are people abusing their power, get rid of them, arrest them. They should not be allowed to do that. But that doesn't mean we get rid of the entire system. So there's things like that. So public safety is a huge one. I'm the only person in the race with a record on public safety. I've also, stood up for merit in our public schools, which at least 2 of the candidates have not. So things like that. We were asked a question at a debate or after a debate a month or so ago, socialism or free market. I was the only person who was able to answer the question with an actual answer. There was a lot of word salad that happened. free markets. I'm a free market person. Socialism has not worked in any country that it's been tried in. Yes, I get it. We haven't done it right yet, but the experimentation is costing us a lot, so let's stop that. There's a lot of other things if you want to ask about any particular subjects, but I I don't want to take up the whole time going through every single thing that we're different on.
But you're talking to Democrats and they're responding like I agree with you. I like what you're saying. So I
Yes.
think that's a really good point to make too, is that it's moderates versus progressives, and it's very apparent in a place like San Francisco, I would imagine.
Yes, and you
Yeah.
just hit on something else that I would love to share, which is it's the moderate versus the progressive. It's also the insiders versus the outsiders. The things that we've accomplished in San Francisco, the really positive changes that we've made in the last several years have been as a result of regular people jumping in and getting involved. And we literally had to fight the insider class every step of the way. The insiders are in it, number one, to protect themselves and advance themselves. We come distant second. They will do what it takes to get their next election, elected position, to get their next job. They will do what it takes to scratch each other's backs and stay in power. And the rest of us, we're the ones who have to say, no, we're not putting up with a DA who doesn't enforce the law. We're not putting up with a school board that is far more interested in hating on, you know, historical figures and changing the names of our schools as opposed to reopening our schools and getting kids back in the classroom because their skills, their education, their mental health is being destroyed by keeping them out of school. So there's this insider outsider divide that I cannot stress enough is killing our country. And two of the people, oh, three of the people, all three of the people I'm running against have been insiders. Two of them extensively in San Francisco have been insiders. And the disasters that we've seen in our city over the last several years, they're the ones responsible.
Corey, I kind of skipped around though on those questions. Do you want to fill in any gaps I may have caused with my unprompted questions?
No, they're pretty good. I did have one question that's maybe unscripted though, Lauren. Is that all right if I?
Go for it.
So one thing that I want to try to understand a little bit better. I'm not I should say I'm not a member of either of the major US parties. I get a sense that for progressive politics, that when I have conversations or listen to Hispanic people or Black people or South Asian people, that even if they're Democrats, really the progressive politics is generally not exclusively, but it's generally a white person's political lens. And in one of the most ethnically diverse cities, in one of the most ethnically diverse states, I would think that either that would be really provable that it's mostly politics supported by white progressives, or it would be debunked and say it's actually very, very ethnically diverse. So from your perspective, how do you see it?
So I think you're getting at the idea that a lot of the politics on the far left is coming from a lot of white progressives. I
Yeah,
think that's
supported by.
I think that's true. I think we've seen that quite a bit. I've personally spoken with lots of people in the broader community, especially in the last in the last 3 months that I've been running. But I also run this little organization in San Francisco where I'm in the community all the time. I have spoken with a lot of people who are tired of their identity being co-opted by white people and who claim that they're doing it for the benefit of an identity group. And the identity group is saying, we don't want that. You know, so many of my Black friends during 2020 were saying to me, we don't agree with this. We don't agree with this defund the police idea. Like, we want our community to be safe. We want more police in our community. And you know, there are people can, you know, are living all over the city, but there are certain communities that are more Chinese or more Black or, you know, more South Asian. My husband is South Asian, by the way. So we have a biracial household, and we, you know, we love debating politics and talking about all kinds of things. But I do think that if that's what if that's where you're going with that question, absolutely. People's identities are being co-opted, and it is mostly in San Francisco. Um, it's a lot of white women, a lot of white people who are saying we have to do this for this community, and the community is saying, hold on a second, that's not what we want at all. But they're kind of being pat on the head and told we know what's best, which I think is highly offensive.
Yeah, in the Midwest, I that's where I'm at. That's what I notice. But there, it's pretty common where a figurehead who is from an ethnic group gets selected to be the spokesperson for these viewpoints, and that creates an impression that they are speaking for every member of their same identity group, when really, and for some reason, I think this used to be commonly understood that when a person speaks, they're speaking for themselves generally, or they might be speaking for their constituents if they're a political figure, or speaking for their organization if they're a business leader. But no woman speaks for all women, no Black person speaks for all Black people, no trans. Well, okay, I speak for all people who have trans history. So this is I am the elected spoke, but no, you know, this is crazy. To the idea that we find one figurehead and say they represent the views that everybody else shares.
Exactly. Exactly. And I actually love that point, because I have said in this race, you know, that would be like me saying I'm going to vote for AOC because she's a woman. Like, there's no, I don't support any of her values or most of her values. There's maybe one or two things we'd agree on. I don't want to be overly generalizing, but you know, I'm not going to vote for AOC ever. And regardless of whether she's a woman, you know, what kind of woman she is, I don't share most of her core ideology. And I think we should be voting for people or supporting people based on merit, based on their ideas, based on what they think you know, what they say they want to do. We shouldn't be voting on it based on their gender or the color of their skin, sorry, their sex, the color of their skin, you know, those are, I think, I, yeah, I want people to be selected based on merit.
I saw one of your opponents is Connie Chan, and while looking at some of the background on her, said if she's elected, this would be historic because she'd be the first Asian American representing San Francisco. And when I saw that, I thought all of this type of, like, these historic firsts, we're never going to run out of them, because it could be like,
Right.
well, who was the first? Was she the first right-handed or the first left-handed Asian?
Right.
Because left-handed people are a minority, and so this might be a double
Yes.
celebration, depending on her hand. Like, it again. But when I was doing some of this background, it was talking about her opponents, and I don't mean to embarrass you, but your name was left off the list of the summary.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Hmm.
So what's going on with this? Is there like a media blackout? Is
Yes.
that polling? Like,
Really?
sometimes I've seen races
Yeah.
where the number 3 person just gets completely ignored anyway. So what's going on here?
So it is absolutely an active media blackout. I have been on the forefront of fixing things in San Francisco for the last 6.5 years. The media has generally disagreed with my positions. And we have a lot of sort of local media in San Francisco that is very, very, very biased. I mean, it's not real journalism, it's actually advancing an ideological agenda. And so, none of those are obviously supportive generally of moderates. They're certainly not supportive of me as a very outspoken moderate who has been at the forefront of the DA recall, which they did not support, the Board of Ed recalls, which they did not support. I am definitely seen as a huge threat. And I think that's also why Scott Wiener went on the offensive. I jumped 400% in the polls in his own poll, and he knew about it before we did, but he knew about it. I think he got that poll back either the same day or right around when I made the video about SB 357 and criticizing him, and then he's attacking me with name calling. So that was definitely a interesting juxtaposition because he found out about that. We didn't find out for a few more days, and I think he views me as the biggest threat in this race because I do take sort of the entire moderate swath of the city versus he is battling it out with Connie Chan and Shoykot for the very progressive to socialist lane. So I know that his team is working overtime bullying the press to keep me out. I know they've been bullying donors and advocates to keep me out. I know they have because some of the people who support me have basically come and told me that. So there's definitely hard work being done to ensure people don't know there's a moderate in the race.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Marie, we wish you luck. When is the primary?
It's 11 days. It's
Oh,
on
wow.
June 2nd. Yes.
June 2nd.
Yes.
Okay. So if you're in California or you're in San Francisco, June 2nd.
Please, yes, please vote. Please vote for me. But make sure you vote. Yes. So thank you so much for having me. A real pleasure to speak with two true warriors in this space. Very, very grateful for the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah,
coming
thank
on.
you.
Absolutely.
This podcast is produced by the LGB Courage Coalition, a registered United States nonprofit fully funded by small donations like yours. We work to promote evidence-based medicine, ending the medicalization of gender nonconformity, and advocating for LGB rights. Supporting this show means supporting that work directly. If what you heard today mattered to you, please like, subscribe, and pass it along. Word of mouth is how independent shows like this one survive. You can reach us in the Substack comments section or by email at lgbcouragecoalition@gmail.com or through the contact page on our website at lgbcourage.org. We want to hear from you. And until next week, stay informed and ready to dissent.